Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Well, I hope your summer is off to a great start. I know at this point the kids have been out of school. You may have already gone on a family vacation or you're planning on leaving soon. This is such a fun time of year. I love summer. I love the opportunity to just take breaths, be outside, enjoy the beauty of God's creation, enjoy time with family. And also, this is a great time to check in on our stewardship so far this year. We're about to be halfway through the year. And so if you started this year with all the plans, all the intentions to step into tracking and organizing and being really intentional with the stewardship of God's resources, and yet here you are in the summer and you just haven't quite gotten there. Or maybe you're finding out that the things that you planned on aren't working. This is the right time of year for us to do a quick check-in because there's still time in the rest of the year to adjust course, to change our plans for the rest of what's coming this year so that we can account for what's happened so far. This is a really great season because we have a little bit of space and we've got half of the year's expenses under our belt, half of the saving, half of our growth in our net worth, half of what we planned on, and we can evaluate, did we make the progress we thought we would? Did things get worse, not better? Did we spend more than we planned on? And what are we going to do about that before we get into the fall and we're stuck in all kinds of commitments that we haven't made any adjustments for? I think more often than not, we find ourselves just kind of along for the ride if we don't check in these checkpoints along the way, if we don't stop, take a breath, and evaluate our reality, rather than getting to the end of the year and wondering, how did we mess this up so bad? How did we miss those opportunities to save? How did our credit card debt grow? These are the things we get to the end of the year and wonder if we're not checking in on them all throughout the year. And so this is the time to sit down as a family, sit down as a couple, to coach the people that you're leading, to sit down and engage in some reflection on the first 6 months of the year. What did it look like? How did it go? How have we been overspending, underspending? And what does that mean? While we still have time to take action. Let's just face the reality that in this season, if you are taking vacations, if you are spending on travel and experiences and amusement parks and all the fun that summer has, you can many times get to a place of overwhelm because these numbers get big quick. But if you have done a good job of mapping out your spending plan for the year, this shouldn't be a surprise to you. The spending that you're doing now was part of the plan. And again, in Good Sense, we are a big fan of talking in terms of spending plan rather than budget. We will spend money. It's part of the deal. It's expected. It's totally fine that we spend. Where a budget is always telling us don't spend, restrict, say no to everything, and then eventually we just binge and we spend recklessly because we feel like we've earned it because of all the restriction. A well-done spending plan feels delightful and connected to the things we love and is organized around our priorities so that we feel really content in the spending of God's resources, and we have decided ahead of time what we're going to spend. And so if you are 6 months into that spending plan, this should tell you a story. You should be able to look at your experience so far and figure out where you misunderstood your reality at the beginning of the year. What has changed about your reality? Did your income go up? Did it go down? Did one of you lose a job? Did you have a pay cut or an unexpected hit because of a time off or a medical issue? Those are the kinds of things that a lot of times we will just continue to assume our life doesn't have to change, and we end up digging holes and discovering too late that we've been digging. And so look back on the first 6 months of the year and ask yourself, how did it go compared to what we thought would happen? What's different than what we expected? Check in on your income. What is the number that you thought it would be by now? Did you have bonuses that didn't quite come through as expected, or certain levels of comp that you didn't hit? Or maybe there's been more than you expected. What happened? Did that money go poof? Did we spend it? Did we give it away? What did we save it? What did we do with that extra? Because that will show you what your tendency is when extra comes in. And that tendency should be generosity if we've mapped out our lifestyle cap. If we've said this is enough, then when more than we expected comes in, we should see generosity lift in response. So where are you at in your income, and what has happened as a result of that? If you've seen that income drop and as a result you're building up more credit card debt, then we are spending at a level that's not sustainable, and we're going to need to make some drastic changes in the second half of the year. Where is the extra spending happening, and where are you underspending? A lot of times at this point in the year, the underspending categories tell maybe even a more important story sometimes than just the overspending categories. If you're overspending on eating out, overspending on entertainment, that is something that can be restricted. But if you are underspending on delight and enjoyment, it may mean that the rest of your costs are not sustainable. It may mean that a bigger rock needs to be moved in order for you to free up the ability to engage in things you care about, the things you enjoy as a family. We can't tell ourselves no forever and be in a place of contentment. We will ultimately end up spending in reaction to just being fed up with that restriction. And so be honest with yourself about where you're underspending and ask, what is the story that is telling us? If we are underspending in categories that really are necessary, then we may need to adjust the things that are unnecessary. If we're underspending on education costs, we're underspending on investing in our own growth. Maybe we're underspending on things like mental health. Those are things that if we planned on spending on those things and we're not, we're stealing from our future selves the ability to be healthy and content and steady. And that is not the trajectory we want to be on. And so evaluate both the overspend and the underspend. A lot of times at this point in the year, we're so quickly drawn to the overspend. We spent way too much money on this category. That is not the only story that matters. It does matter, but the underspending category can tell you just as much about where you're at and what is sustainable and what's not. Evaluate your net worth growth. This is a great time to look at those first 6 months and see, did your debt go down? Have you been making progress on reducing that side of your net worth equation? Are you saving adequately into your retirement plans and into brokerage accounts that are building over time and creating more assets while also paying down debt? That is the way your net worth grows. And we need to be doing both, not just one or the other. And so if we see that our debt has been going down and that's how the net worth is going up, but we are still not saving adequately, what do we need to do in the next 6 months in order to change that? If we are seeing that our net worth has been stagnant, it really hasn't gone up, we've been saving, but our debt has continued to grow, it's probably because that saving is pushing us beyond our spending limits. We're still spending in categories beyond what we can afford. And so even though we're putting money into our retirement accounts, we're seeing that spit out on the other side in spending that we can't afford. And so something needs to give there. We need to make sure that we get our spending plan to steady out to where we're able to both save and pay down debt, that we don't end up just backfilling our assets with more liabilities because we're growing the debt at the same rate that we're growing our assets. That feels like we're treading water, but over time we're actually going backwards because that debt is accruing at an interest rate that's higher than what your asset base can produce. In other words, if you have an 18% credit card debt and your retirement account made 7 or 8%, it doesn't matter. You're still going backwards, even if those accounts are equal. And so we want to make sure that we're really chewing down that debt and we're managing that well. If you have been lax in your tracking, if you don't even have the answers to these questions because you haven't really put in place the discipline of tracking these resources, start now. Don't start by going back to January. That's too big of a hill to climb. Just start July 1st. Start for the second half of the year and start tracking it more specifically in a more disciplined way. Just begin where you are so that you can start to get the data and be able to really face your reality with open eyes rather than guessing or hoping that the decisions that you're making are actually moving you forward. Recognize that we are going to be entering into a very expensive second half of the year. And so if we have been overspending, if we have been undersaving for the first half of the year, hoping that it's going to just get better in the second half is naive. We do need to face where things really are and decide what actually needs to change in the second half. And this is why sitting down with the family midway through the year like this is a great opportunity to level set. If because of the vacations that you have taken or are going to be taking this summer, it leaves you in a place where things become less affordable in the second half of the year, or you've overspent and you're ahead of your spending plan goals, this is the time to set the expectations that Christmas is going to be smaller this year, that we may need to not take that fall camping trip, that we may need to make some changes for the second half in order to account for what we did that was out of line in the first half. We don't want to be having those conversations the week before we were supposed to go on that trip in the fall. Or we don't want to be telling our kids we can't afford to send them to their fall weekend camp with the church group right as they're about to sign up. We don't want to be telling them that Christmas is going to have to be smaller in late November. This is a time where we're distant enough from those things to see those trade-offs and face those consequences with less devastating emotion. We can see that and recognize that that is the trade-off we need to make, and we can make that decision now, talk about it now when it's not as emotionally charged, and then when we get to that point, we can remind ourselves, remember back in June, we talked about this. Remember, we decided that this was going to have to change because of what happened in the first half of the year. Oh, yeah, that's right. We can settle into those consequences with less drama and less tension if we have a lot of runway and we communicate clearly why it matters for us to make these changes in the second half. We have plenty of time to make up for what happened in the first half if we face it, if we understand it, and if we make the changes that actually will overcome it. These are not small, insignificant things. If you have been overspending and undersaving in the first half, that means you need to flip that. You need to underspend and oversave in the second half in order to still be on track to hit your target for the end of the year. These are big shifts. They're not small on the edges. We do need to face those consequences. And the longer of a runway that we give ourselves, the less painful it is to absorb those consequences. Because if we start now by changing our savings rate in our 401ks, but we spread it out over 6 months rather than spreading it out over the last month, trying to cram it in with some bonus, just push everything in at the last minute, it becomes much more painful. And if we reduce our monthly spending over the next 6 months rather than reducing it just in December, it's less painful. This is why we want to be doing these check-ins so that we can make these tweaks and have the consequences be something the family absorbs in stride, rather than having it be something that shocks them, something that frustrates us, something that makes us feel a deep sense of disappointment. We can team up and have shared sacrifice for the second half of the year if we're all aligned to what it's accomplishing for us as faithful stewards. We want our family in on this conversation. We want to coach families to be having open dialogue. The summer is a great time to do that check-in, to make sure that when we get to the end of this year, we cross that finish line being more faithful in our stewardship than we started this year being, that we've grown in all these disciplines, that we've honored God more than we did last year with the resources that he gave us to manage, and that we know what decisions we need to make and why, so that we are confident in the future that we're stepping into, so that we're saving for future obedience, so that we're stepping further into generosity, we're sharing the abundance that he's given us. Those are all things that are the result of stepping further and further into faithful stewardship, and that doesn't happen by accident. We need these intentional check-ins in order to make the decisions that lead to that outcome. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you.